In 1996, an orange marsupial in jean shorts spun his way onto the PlayStation and changed gaming forever. Crash Bandicoot wasn't just a game, it was Sony's answer to Mario and Sonic, a mascot that proved the PlayStation could compete with Nintendo and Sega's platforming dominance. The original trilogy sold millions, spawned a beloved kart racer, and established Crash as one of gaming's most recognizable icons. For a brief, glorious moment, Crash Bandicoot stood alongside the industry's biggest names. Then, it all fell apart. By 2008, Crash Bandicoot had become a punchline, a cautionary tale about how quickly a beloved franchise can nosedive into mediocrity. The games were terrible. The character design had been butchered. Even the most die-hard fans had to admit that their favorite marsupial was well past his prime. The franchise was shelved, seemingly dead, a victim of corporate mismanagement, developer musical chairs, and creative bankruptcy. Today, we're exploring why Crash crashed, how one of gaming's brightest stars burned out so spectacularly, and what lessons the industry should have learned from this franchise's tragic decline. The story of Crash's success starts with Naughty Dog, the studio founded by Andy Gavin and Jason Rubin in 1986. After releasing a 3DO fighter called Wave the Warrior in 1994, Universal Interactive signed the fledgling studio to a 3-game deal, recognizing their potential. Jason and Andy wanted to create a mascot for their next project, something that could compete with Nintendo's Mario and Sega's Sonic. Inspired by the outback wildlife of Australia, they settled on a Bandicoot, of all creatures. The character went through multiple iterations. Initially called Willy the Wombat, the design was squat and weaselly with a large nose, a goofy grin, and inexplicably a Zorro mask. Through the editing process, Willy was stretched, made leaner and more manic, ultimately arriving at the triangle-shaped, jean shorts-wearing Crash we know today. The technical limitations of the PlayStation meant artists had to keep Crash under 600 polygons. They managed 532, creating one of the most iconic character designs of the 90s through creative constraint. Crash Bandicoot launched in 1996 and became an instant phenomenon. The game sold over 6 million copies, making it the 8th best-selling PlayStation game of all time. Naughty Dog had positioned themselves directly across from Nintendo's Super Mario 64 display at E3, boldly declaring they were creating Sony's mascot. The gamble paid off. Critics praised the game's tight controls, creative level design, and technical achievement. Shigeru Miyamoto himself visited Naughty Dog's booth to try the game. The sequel, Crash Bandicoot 2: Cortex Strikes Back, refined the formula with quality-of-life improvements and new mechanics. Then came Crash Bandicoot Warped in 1998, which many consider the series' high point. The time travel theme allowed for diverse environments and vehicle sequences that showcased the PlayStation's capabilities. The game was a tremendous success, cementing Crash's status as gaming royalty. In 1999, Naughty Dog released Crash Team Racing, their take on the kart racing genre. Rather than just copying Mario Kart, they innovated with a boost mechanic that required active engagement and an overworld hub to explore. CTR received positive reception for expanding the genre in meaningful ways. Crash Bandicoot had achieved something remarkable: 4 consecutive excellent games that defined PlayStation gaming in the late 90s. Then everything changed. Sony purchased Naughty Dog in 2001, intending to create new IP for the upcoming PlayStation 2. But critically, the Crash Bandicoot IP didn't go with them. Universal Interactive retained the rights to Crash, and that decision would prove catastrophic for the franchise. Naughty Dog moved on to create Jak and Daxter, later Uncharted, and The Last of Us, becoming one of the industry's most respected studios. Crash, meanwhile, was left behind. Universal handed Crash to developer Eurocom, who created Crash Bash in 2000, a multiplayer minigame collection in the vein of Mario Party. Reviews were mostly favorable, but fans were aching for a proper platforming sequel. More concerning, Crash was being passed to developers who, while competent, just simply weren't Naughty Dog. The magic that made the original game special, the tight controls, creative level design, and indefinable charm, was difficult to replicate. Development of the next mainline entry was a disaster from the start. Traveler's Tales was working on an ambitious 3D open-world relaunch called Crash Bandicoot Worlds. But after a falling out between Universal and Sony, everything changed. Developer Traveler's Tales was forced to alter the game from a free roaming title to a standard Crash game. Even worse, they had to scrap all previous work and begin development from scratch with only 12 months to complete the game. The result was Crash Bandicoot: The Wrath of Cortex, released in 2001 for PlayStation 2, with ports to GameCube and Xbox following in 2002. The game featured most of the same elements as previous entries, along with a graphical overhaul. Wrath of Cortex isn't a bad game, objectively speaking. It's competent, it works. But it was missing the charm that Naughty Dog brought to the franchise. The reaction was mixed, though sales remained strong, making the game a commercial success despite its creative shortcomings. But commercial success masked growing problems. Franchise fatigue was setting in. Crash Bandicoot: Wrath of Cortex felt like more of the same rather than evolution. The vehicle mechanics, already present in Warped, were overused. The game lacked the spark of innovation that defined the original trilogy. Critics and fans alike noted that something fundamental was missing, though few could articulate exactly what. In retrospect, the answer is obvious. It wasn't made by people who truly understood what made Crash special. The following years brought a deluge of mediocre entries that gradually eroded the franchise's reputation. Vicarious Visions helmed Crash's Game Boy Advance debut with Crash Bandicoot: The Huge Adventure in 2002 and Crash Bandicoot 2 Entranced in 2003. These were competent 2D platformers that featured power-ups and mechanics lifted from Warped, but offered little innovation. They were serviceable, portable games, but did nothing to advance the franchise. Crash Nitro Kart arrived in 2003, giving fans another dose of weapon-fueled racing. Unfortunately, it didn't leave the same impact as CTR. The magic of the original kart racer, with its perfect handling and ingenious boost system, wasn't fully captured. Then came Crash Bandicoot Purple, Ripto's Rampage, a crossover with Spyro the Dragon for Game Boy Advance. Trying to emulate the success of dual-version franchises like Pokemon, both an orange and purple version were released. Consequently, both were terrible, representing a new low point for the franchise. Behind the scenes, even more problems were brewing. Universal canceled Traveler's Tales' development of Crash Bandicoot Evolution, a promising project that could have revitalized the series. Evolution was set to introduce new gameplay elements, mechanics, and controls, potentially giving Crash the refresh he desperately needed. The cancellation came after Insomniac released Ratchet & Clank in 2003, and Traveler's Tales believed the projects were too similar. Rather than push forward with their vision, they scrapped Evolution and started from scratch, eventually creating Crash Twinsanity. Crash Twinsanity, released in 2004, received mixed reviews but managed to find an audience. The game had a unique open-world structure and paired Crash with his nemesis, Dr. Neo Cortex, for cooperative gameplay. It was creative and different, taking risks that the series desperately needed, but it was also rough around the edges. Clearly a game that needed more development time. Still, Twinsanity showed that innovation was possible within the Crash formula, and many fans remember it fondly despite its flaws. Traveler's Tales wanted to build on Twinsanity's foundation. They pitched a proper sequel where Crash would be stuck inside a TV, exploring levels themed after popular genres. A Wild West show, a black and white cartoon, a cooking show, even a medical drama. This was reminiscent of the Gex franchise and could have taken Crash in an exciting new direction. Universal rejected it. They also rejected Crash Clash Racing, another sequel pitch. The studio that had worked hardest to revitalize Crash was unceremoniously dropped from the franchise. Instead, Crash moved to Radical Entertainment for what would become the final nails in the coffin. In 2005, Crash Tag Team Racing arrived, a kart racer where cars could fuse together during races. Critics weren't impressed. The game felt gimmicky, lacking the polish and creativity that made CTR special. More alarming, Universal decided to redesign Crash's character model, giving him a tribal tattoo and a more aggressive, angular look that fans immediately hated. This wasn't Crash Bandicoot anymore. This was some focus-grouped corporate approximation of what executives thought kids wanted. The redesign represented everything wrong with the franchise's direction. Crash's original appeal came from his manic energy combined with an underdog charm. He was goofy but not dumb, energetic but not aggressive. The new design made him look like he was trying too hard to be cool, chasing trends rather than setting them. As Naughty Dog co-founder Andy Gavin would later say, "Our Crash had a certain whimsical edge to him. Sure, it was goofy, but it wasn't dumb. The new Crash was both trying to be edgy and failing miserably." Crash of the Titans launched in 2007, introducing a mechanic where Crash could jack enemies, taking control of their bodies. The game shifted toward beat-em-up combat rather than traditional platforming. Critics and fans were not impressed. The game felt like a desperate attempt to modernize Crash by borrowing mechanics from other successful franchises, rather than playing to his strengths. The character design remained awful, the levels were uninspired, and the magic that made Crash special had completely evaporated. Mind Over Mutant followed in 2008, doubling down on the beat-em-up formula and making things even worse. Game Informer's Andrew Reiner called it a mess of a game and a new low point for the once-loved marsupial. The reviews were brutal, sales were disappointing, even the most loyal fans who defended previous entries couldn't justify Mind Over Mutant's existence. The game represented creative bankruptcy, a franchise limping along through momentum and brand recognition rather than any genuine quality or innovation. In 2008, after Mind Over Mutant's failure, the Crash Bandicoot franchise was shelved. For the better part of a decade, Crash Bandicoot effectively died. Activision, who had acquired the franchise through their merger with Vivendi, showed no interest in developing new games. Crash became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly beloved franchises can be destroyed through mismanagement and creative neglect. But why did this happen? How did a franchise with 4 consecutive classics nosedive so dramatically? The answer involves several interconnected failures. First, and most obviously, Crash lost Naughty Dog, the developers who understood the character and gameplay at a fundamental level. Zelda has been guided by consistent internal Nintendo teams for decades. Sonic, despite his own troubled history, always had Sega's internal teams working on major entries. Crash was passed from developer to developer, each taking a swing at the franchise with none managing to recapture the glory days. Second, Crash Bandicoot was always going to be difficult to iterate on. The original trilogy perfected a specific type of linear 3D platforming. You run forward through carefully designed levels, jumping on enemies and breaking crates. This formula worked brilliantly, but it's also inherently limiting. How do you evolve that without fundamentally changing what made it special? Mario successfully transitioned to full 3D exploration with Mario 64, then to galaxy hopping with Galaxy. Sonic struggled with similar issues, though he eventually found footing with games like Sonic Mania. Crash never successfully evolved beyond his PS1 formula. Third, corporate ownership of the IP created instability. When Universal, later Vivendi, then Activision, controlled Crash, they treated him as a product rather than a character. They farmed out development to whoever was available, made arbitrary decisions about character designs, and canceled promising projects on financial whims. There was no creative vision guiding the franchise, just quarterly earnings targets and market analysis. This approach kills creativity and innovation, reducing beloved characters to soulless corporate assets. Fourth, the industry changed around Crash. In the early 2000s, gaming was transitioning from linear platformers to open-world experiences, from simple mascot characters to complex protagonists with depth. Games like Grand Theft Auto 3, Halo, and The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind redefined what players expected from games. Crash felt increasingly dated, a relic of 90s platforming in an era demanding more sophisticated experiences. Without Naughty Dog's creative genius to guide his evolution, Crash couldn't adapt to this changing landscape. And finally, and perhaps most damningly, the people making Crash games stopped caring about quality. When you read interviews with developers who worked on the later Crash games, you sense resignation. They're trying to fulfill contractual obligations and meet deadlines, not create something special. Compare this to Naughty Dog's obsessive refinement of the original games, where they'd spend weeks perfecting Crash's jump arc or adjusting level geometry by single pixels. That level of care and attention to detail disappeared the moment Crash left Naughty Dog, and it showed. There's a perfect quote that encapsulates the tragedy of Crash's decline. In a 2008 interview with PALGN, a Naughty Dog developer was asked if it's disappointing to see other developers work on Crash Bandicoot. The response was, yes, a little bit. I don't know if you want to quote me on this, it's a little bit like watching your daughter do porn. That visceral disgust and heartbreak from Crash's creators speaks volumes about what happened to the franchise. For years, Crash Bandicoot existed in limbo, occasionally appearing in mobile endless runners, but otherwise forgotten. Fans who'd grown up with the original trilogy watched in horror as their beloved character was degraded and destroyed. There was genuine anger in the gaming community about what had happened to Crash, about how corporate greed and creative incompetence had killed one of gaming's most promising franchises.
Then something unexpected happened. At Sony's E3 2016 press conference, they announced the Crash Bandicoot N. Sane trilogy, full remakes of the original 3 games developed by Vicarious Visions. The announcement generated massive hype. Fans who'd written off Crash decades ago suddenly cared again. When the N. Sane trilogy released in 2017, it became a roaring success, selling millions of copies and proving that demand for classic Crash still existed. The success of the N. Sane trilogy led to Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled in 2019, a full remake of the beloved kart racer. This too sold incredibly well, further validating that Crash Bandicoot, when done right, still resonated with audiences. Then came Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time, in 2020, the first new mainline Crash game in over a decade that wasn't terrible. Developed by Toys for Bob, Crash 4 returned to the series' roots while adding modern refinements. Critics praised it as a worthy successor to the original trilogy, finally giving Crash the sequel he deserved 20 years too late. So, Crash came back, proving that even franchises destroyed by mismanagement can be resurrected with proper care and respect for what made them special. But the resurrection doesn't erase the decade of mediocrity. It doesn't undo the damage done to Crash's reputation or the opportunities wasted during his wilderness years. The story of why Crash crashed remains a cautionary tale about the dangers of treating beloved characters as corporate assets rather than creative properties deserving care and respect. The lessons are clear. First, maintain creative continuity. When you have developers who understand a franchise at a fundamental level, keep them involved or at least respect their vision. Second, don't chase trends at the expense of identity. Crash failed when he tried to be something he wasn't, whether that was edgy, modern, or mechanically complex. Third, quality matters more than quantity. The flood of mediocre Crash games in the 2000s did more damage than releasing nothing at all. Fourth, corporate ownership without creative vision kills franchises. You need people who care about the characters and games, not just the revenue they generate. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, respect your audience. Fans loved Crash Bandicoot because of what he was, not what market research suggested he should become. When developers and publishers forgot that, when they redesigned him with tribal tattoos and made him aggressive instead of whimsical, when they churned out mediocre games with his name attached, they betrayed the trust fans had placed in the franchise. That betrayal takes years to overcome, and some franchises never recover. Crash crashed because the people controlling his fate forgot why he mattered in the first place. They saw a mascot to exploit rather than a character to nurture. They prioritized short-term profits over long-term franchise health. They treated quality as optional and fans as money to be extracted rather than people to be respected. The result was predictable. A once beloved icon reduced to punchline status, his reputation destroyed, his games reviled. The resurrection of Crash through the N. Sane trilogy, Nitro Fueled, and Crash 4 proves that the damage wasn't permanent. With proper respect and creative vision, even fallen franchises can rise again. But the lost decade between 2008 and 2017, when Crash was essentially dead, represents countless missed opportunities and squandered potential. An entire generation of gamers never experienced good Crash Bandicoot games during their formative years, missing out on the character who defined PlayStation for millions of 90s kids. That's why Crash crashed. Not because the games couldn't work in modern gaming, but because the people making them stopped caring about making them work. Not because platformers were dead, but because the specific magic of Crash Bandicoot requires understanding and care that corporate development pipelines couldn't provide. Not because fans moved on, but because they were given nothing worth sticking around for. The orange marsupial in jean shorts spun his way into our hearts in 1996. For 4 glorious years, he was on top of the gaming world, Sony's answer to Mario and Sonic. Then he fell. Hard. Victim to corporate mismanagement and creative bankruptcy. Today, Crash is back, but he'll never fully escape the shadow of his dark years. The story of why Crash crashed remains one of gaming's most tragic and instructive cautionary tales. Here's hoping the industry learned its lesson. Though, if history is any guide, we'll probably watch the same tragedy play out with other beloved franchises in years to come.